not too complicated. Don't overthink it. You can always slide it back an inch or two over time and just sort of fine tune that distance. Now, height and angle, these two are a little bit more complicated. And really, these two things are very much married together, right? As we make a ride cymbal or any cymbal, lower and lower and lower, it's gonna have to get a little bit more flat, right? Because we need to have access to the top of this cymbal. Almost everything that we're gonna be doing, for the most part, is gonna be on the very top of the cymbal. So in order to have access to that, so we're not having to reach up and over, as we get lower and lower and lower, we want to flatten that cymbal out. If a cymbal is flat, a ride cymbal, if it's flat and high, the only thing we're able to do with it is crash, right? Keep in mind, that's how we oftentimes set crash cymbals, flat and a little bit higher, which presents us with that edge so we can really dig in. With ride cymbals, we don't necessarily want to have it set up that way unless that's the only way that we're going to use it. If we want access to the top of the cymbal, we have to have that somewhat facing towards us a little bit. So as we go lower, we would get it a little bit more flat. I don't recommend ever going completely flat unless you're in that pop punk sort of world where you're never going to play the ride cymbal normally. You're always going to crash it from the side. In that case, maybe a flat ride that's a little bit lower in this area, maybe that would make sense for you. But for everybody else, I think a slight angle towards you is definitely important. And just know as you go lower, that angle will be a little bit less extreme, maybe only a very slight tilt if you're playing with a ride cymbal down here where I keep this stacker. Now, if you're somebody that's on social media over the last few years, you have definitely seen the high ride thing come back. And that's not really a trend. It's actually something that's been going on for a really long time. If you go back and watch drummers from even the 60s and 70s, as far back as I've seen, people have been putting their rides up high for a really long time. But there's a few things about this that make it kind of tricky. I think one thing that people get confused about with high ride cymbals is they think they're a little bit higher than they actually are. If you look at, I don't know what to call it, but the part of the cymbal stand where your ride cymbal actually goes on, right? So the little thing where you put over top of the hole, the threaded part of the cymbal stand, if you look at that, they're almost level with my crashes. I know I have this crash off right now, but they're almost perfectly level. Like the bells of the cymbals are on this same plane all the way around. So it's not that the cymbal itself is just that much higher. It's really that we're used to seeing ride cymbals a lot lower. So we call it a high ride. Maybe it's high for a ride, but it's not really higher than any other cymbal on the kit. It's actually kind of on that same plane where all the bells are sort of right around this same area. Excluding this far right crash over here, I tend to keep that one a little bit lower. But for the most part, a high ride isn't like some absurdly high cymbal. Maybe it is for some people, but I just think a high ride means it's level with the other cymbals, which throws people off for some reason. And of course, the question is, why would you put your ride cymbal up this high? Well, there's a few advantages to this. Some are technique based, and we'll get into that after this segment. But just kind of discussing why I put my ride cymbal up. What I like about having a ride cymbal up here is that it allows you to, what I call like stacking your elbows, right? So when it goes up like this, it allows me to almost have my forearm resting on top of my elbow. So I can have this sort of vibe, almost like you're reading a newspaper, as opposed to having a ride cymbal that is flush with, let's say, your rack tom, right? It's a little bit more of a hover. It seems like I have to hold my arm out in front of me a little bit more unnaturally than if I were able to just hold it right here. Kind of like reading a newspaper on the tips of your fingers way out in front of you. That's what playing a ride cymbal felt like to me sometimes. And so I wanted to relax, let my elbows come towards my body a little bit, bring my hands up, and for some reason, this just felt much more natural to me. Shout out to my buddy Forrest Rice. He's the one who actually explained that newspaper analogy to me. And he's like, man, it just feels like if you have something that you want to focus on, you would bring it a little bit more up in front of you, not so much down and outstretched. And I just felt like that's what I was doing with my ride. It felt down and it felt stretched out a little bit. I just wanted it up right in front of me, and this hand position felt way better for me. Now, remember that I said as ride cymbals go down, they tend to flatten out a little bit more. And in the same way, when they go up, they tend to be a little bit more angled. So the higher you get this ride cymbal, the more of a steep angle you're going to have towards yourself. This is actually a pretty steep angle for me. But the reason is I need to maintain access to the top of this ride cymbal, right? And we can find examples over the years of drummers who have put ride cymbals way, way up and almost completely flat, like facing them, right? So it's almost like they're looking into the top of the ride cymbal like it's a mirror. That works if you're not planning on crashing that thing at all, because you can't really crash when it's that angled. But all of this placement stuff is about finding that balance. Where can I still use this cymbal, but place it in a way that makes the most sense, right? Because you need access to the bell, to the top. You need to be able to crash it. And so the angle is going to play a huge role there. If you're interested in setting your ride a little bit higher, I would do that, and I would try to take the edge of the cymbal. Imagine if you were throwing this like a Frisbee. I want it to come as a Frisbee, and I honestly want it to like hit your belt buckle. That's about where I want that angle. And you can hold that true no matter the height, right? So as you put this way, way up, it's going to tilt an angle more and more towards you, so this edge is pointing right at your belt buckle. If we were to go down, you'd have to flatten it out to get that edge to point right at your belt buckle. But for me, that seems to be the best balance between, having the ability to crash into the side while also keeping access to the top of the cymbal available.